All right. Hi, 10IB students. This is a little tiny additional bit of information, an additional challenge for your work this week in terms of your IB programming. Now, I've got a document on the go that has some of the essentials for what you need to know for going into IB next year. I've really narrowed it down to the overall sort of vision IB has for integrating your view of text into these slides about why the writer writes, how readers interpret text, and the choices that an author has made. There's a slide in here about the new program and the 3 units. So the idea of readers, writers, and text, text and context, and intertextuality. So those time and place is rather the middle one. So those 3 units we've talked about a little bit. This little diagram is a great picture of the kinds of ways that IB wants you to zoom into texts and how that'll help you at university. I can't even begin to touch on it. It's incredibly useful. And then I've also put in here a couple of form-based language pieces. So one is the language of dominant impressions, which really is about the choices that an author has made, the dominant impressions that they create in how the readers interpret the text. So it's the interaction between these two. That language of dominant impression is about how that meaning resonates with readers, as opposed to just what the messaging is. So not like my message might be that love is blind, but it's the how that a dominant impression will get at. Like, well, how do we know that love is blind, and how does that actually work in the story of Romeo and Juliet? That's something that you'll get into. So I've also the third thing. So first thing is the kind of the units. Second thing would be this little diagram and the worldview of text analysis that IB has. Third thing, dominant impressions. The fourth thing is a little bit of comparative writing. It's the structure of comparative writing. We won't do that this week. That's for later. So for right now, I just want to do one phrase, dominant impression, and let you know how this affects your work this week in 10IB. Okay, so next slide. Dominant impression, like I said, is about a method of construction. It's the how of how an author does something. So you still have a theme idea or a thesis idea. You still have the message of a text, but you're marrying that message with what the author structurally does. And so I like to think of this as like dominant impressions, like a strong worker putting together pieces of engineering, right? Like building a scaffold. So methods of construction, think about that. And what this actually means for us is that a dominant impression needs to show a device or a feature, a structure that Shakespeare uses in terms of love. So when you go to write your paragraphs this week, you're not just going to say, oh yeah, Romeo clearly is mature in love because he uses nature imagery. No, I want you to actually talk about that nature imagery and say what it does. So nature imagery is a structure. It's a method of construction, but I want you to get into how that shows some maturity and how it shows your major idea. So Shakespeare uses blank, symbolism, metaphor, alliteration. What is the thing Shakespeare uses to explore that the love of mature people is grounded in nature? So does Shakespeare use soliloquy? Does Shakespeare use, what's another thing we could talk about? Irony. Does Shakespeare use similes? What is the structure that he uses to explore the idea? That's what a dominant impression does. So you have an idea about love, good, like mature love's grounded in your world of nature, then tell me how that nature stuff is brought up. Metaphor, simile, personification, irony. What is going on? You could also phrase it this way. So these are just like example fill in the blank kind of formulas. Shakespeare uses structure, so he uses simile, metaphor, to create the impression that people who think one way, people who ground their love in nature, have a more mature attitude towards love than people who are extreme in their or are stuck in fantasies. So people who are grounded, better than people who are in fantasies in terms of maturity. I'm not saying that's true, but let's pretend that's an argument. So Shakespeare uses contrasting images to show people who are mature or grounded, as opposed to people who are extreme and stuck in fantasies. That could be a thing that you argue. An example I've written out here for you is that Shakespeare uses Romeo's nature symbolism to explore how the love of mature people is grounded in the reality of their environment. That's just one example. you go into the text and see what you think of the story and of those two segments. I'm actually arguing a weird position. Most people don't say Romeo's more mature. Most people think that Juliet is more mature in some of the early parts of the play. If you were to read online, there's a lot of scholars who think that, but that doesn't mean it's true. So I want you to go and see what you think and what you find, who's more mature and why. You're going to tell me the reason in terms of theme, like, oh, because some people are stuck in fantasies, or oh, because some people are grounded. That's the why in terms of an idea. But I also want you to look for the why in terms of a structure. So we see it. So this is the idea. People need to ground their love to be mature. And you see that in symbolism, metaphor, personification. You're going to stretch eventually in IB to have three of those structures. But right now, if you have 2 or 1, that's totally okay. Just make sure that your idea isn't exactly the same as mine. It should be your idea about a section of the text. Okay? Good luck, have fun, and I hope this has been helpful to talk about the world of dominant impressions as opposed to theme. Dominant impressions being the structural extension of how that theme is constructed. Take care. Bye. Ooh, I lost my window. I'm going to shut the recording. Bye, everybody. Have a great week.